Uh, Rebecca, John, Lita, Inder, thank you for wonderful discussions on data privacy, governance, and the solutions that can help us, particularly during this pandemic. Now, for the second half of this webinar, we will hear about blockchain and digital currency. MIT Digital Currency Initiative has done a great deal of research and collaboration in this area. So I'd like to introduce our second speaker, Dr. Neha Narula. Dr. Narula is the director of MIT Digital Currency Initiative, where her research focuses on cryptocurrency and distributed systems. She received her PhD in computer science from MIT. Dr. Narula has designed and taught a number of courses in cryptocurrency and blockchain at MIT. In 2018, Dr. Narula was named to Wired list of 25 technology leaders and the Fortune's Ledger's 40 under 40 list. Dr. Narula has given a TED Talk on the future of money with over 2 million views, and she is currently the member of World Economic Forum Global Blockchain Council. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Neha Narula. Over to you, Neha.
Thank you, David. It's wonderful to be here with you all. Thank you for having me. Hearing the bits of the last panel, I think that this is an excellent transition, talking about trust and talking about data as money. So let's get started. I should be sharing my screen now, and hopefully that's all working. And let me just make sure that I have the chat up so that I can see all of you. Great, wonderful. So my name is Neha Narula, and as David said, I'm the director of the Digital Currency Initiative based out of the MIT Media Lab. Our focus is on building the next version of the Internet of Value. We're a group of educators, conveners, researchers, and we work on cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology. So what does it mean when we say we're interested in building the Internet of Value? Well, unfortunately, the way that we handle value today is pretty archaic. It's 2020 and I can't send a micropayment. I just can't do it. There's no way to pay any of you a fraction of a cent. And in fact, even if I wanted to pay you $5 digitally, I would have to hope that we were both on Venmo or both on PayPal or that we both had the same bank. If I want to send you a text message, you tell me your phone number, and it doesn't matter where in the world you are or what network you're on, and I can send you information. I could probably even send you a photo. But good luck if I want to send you a digital dollar. In addition to that, there are 1.7 billion people in the world who are underbanked and who don't have access to digital financial services. And a personal pet peeve of mine, I think it's way too difficult to write applications that send and receive payments. It's very difficult for a small developer to do that. So I argue that these are failures in the way that we allocate value. It's like we're operating in a system with clogged pipes. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is the case for open protocols in the area of money. So to start, what is a protocol? A protocol is a language. It's a way of interacting that we all agree to. For example, well, pre-COVID, I'd go up to someone and I'd say hello, and then I would reach out and shake their hand, and they would shake my hand. And this would be completely acceptable as a way to greet each other. That's a protocol for greeting. Now, the protocols I'm talking about aren't usually executed by humans. Instead, they're executed by computers. For example, your browser speaks a protocol called HTTP. So what do I mean when I say open protocols? I mean that anyone can use them. There are no gatekeepers. And we're going to go into a bit more detail about what that means. So in order to start, I think it's useful to talk about the internet and how it's structured. So we're going to go on a little bit of a dive into the history of the internet. So a huge innovation behind the internet was this ability to discretize information and to send it around the world instantly and cheaply. Shared standards for how to interpret that information are critical. Anyone can do it. Anyone has access. You don't have to be a professional. You can put up a website and people can come and visit it. Now, beneath the internet, there's a stack of these protocols. In fact, there are many of them. At the bottom, one could say there's Ethernet, which is how two computers talk to each other if you put a wire between them. On top of that, TCP/IP, computers in a network, HTTP for web pages in the browser, and on top of that, protocols for security. And at every layer, it wasn't necessarily a company that created this layer and that shepherded it. Oftentimes it was a nonprofit institution, or if it was a company that didn't necessarily make a lot of money off of that layer. There were companies that made a tremendous amount of money at each layer. Billion-dollar companies, for example. There's 3Com for the Ethernet. There's Cisco for TCP/IP. Amazon, Google, Facebook, name it, have built their businesses on top of the web. And things like PayPal required things like SSL and TLS. Now, it's not just these companies, though. There were these organizations, IETF, W3C, ICANN, that shepherded these protocols. So this is going to become important in just a moment. Because you see, there were other alternatives to this layer of protocols. It wasn't obvious that the layer of protocols was even going to win. There were these closed platforms. So one example is AOL. So this was how I first got on the internet in 1994. And when you logged onto the internet, what you saw were these 7 categories: education, computing, sports. That was the internet to me in 1994. And you were inside this world controlled by AOL. There was another system that was more popular in other countries called Alex. It was a Minitel system offered by Bell Canada, and it offered chat rooms, but it cost on the order of 30 cents a minute in order to get into these chat rooms. Now, we don't use Alex or AOL really today. These are not the platforms that won out. What we found is that there's oftentimes this distinction between open and closed protocols, and open tends to win. And what we see here is we had telecom and the internet. And what is done extremely well are internet applications that are based on these open protocols, whereas telecom has not done as well. Now, it takes a very long time for these layered architectures and protocols to develop. So what I'm showing you here is a picture of ARPANET from 1977. So ARPANET was the first incarnation of the internet. And it was started in 1977. It was another 20 years until we had the web browser, and it was another 30 years until we had the iPhone and Android phones and a real computer in everyone's pocket. But I would argue that it's worth it. We've gotten so much from the internet. It has pervaded everything. It has completely changed the way that we take in news, that we communicate, the way that financial services operate, retail, commerce, everything. These platforms are extraordinarily powerful. So you might not know this, but there were actually different competing protocols at each layer. It was by no means an obvious idea that these were the protocols that would win. So at the layer of the Ethernet, there was an alternative protocol called Token Ring, developed by IBM. X25 was at the layer of TCP/IP. And there was an alternative to HTTP developed at the University of Minnesota called Gopher. And again, there are protocols put forth by Microsoft for SSL. But it's really interesting when you start to delve into why one protocol wins over another one. So Token Ring was actually better technology than Ethernet. It was faster, but IBM charged a lot in royalties. So Token Ring hardware was 5 to 6 times the cost of Ethernet hardware. And it also had more expensive cables. So because of this, there was natural pressure to use things like Ethernet. And over time, Ethernet got faster. There were a lot of networks on X25, but eventually everyone switched over to TCP/IP. That's still used a little bit in ATMs today, X25. Gopher is also very interesting. So University of Minnesota, where they developed Gopher, wanted to start charging fees. Whereas for HTTP, Tim Berners-Lee developed that at CERN in Switzerland. CERN basically let HTTP go. They said, here, we're releasing this into the commons. You can use it as you want. You don't have to pay us. Go for it. And what ended up happening was HTTP won out over Gopher. So if we go back to thinking about open versus closed, we find it's actually not quite that simple. It's also about unowned versus owned. The protocols that won are the ones where the creators actually gave them up, which made them easier to adopt by the community. Well, so you might ask, hey, what's wrong with being owned? I'm a company and I'm trying to make money. Of course, I want to control the IP. Of course, I want to control how my protocols are used, and but I also want other people to build on top of them. Well, unfortunately, we're operating in a day and age today where there aren't a lot of trust. There isn't a lot of trust of large companies and their incentives and what they're going to do with these protocols. Sometimes you just have to get institutions out of the way. Microsoft almost killed the web. So what I'm showing you here is a Gallup poll, and I'm showing you the very bottom part of the poll. So this is what this poll is measuring is how much faith the public has in these institutions. And so this is the positive side, a lot of confidence or some confidence. And what we see here is that our institutions are not doing very well. Banks are pretty bad, only 32% confidence by the public, but they're not even the worst. There's not a lot of confidence in the criminal justice system, in our media, in television news, in our political system. This is the environment that we are operating in today. And all of these institutions have become incredibly complex, and they're all structured in this top-down hierarchical way. People don't have enough visibility into how they work, and so they don't trust them. And we've seen a lot of unfortunate examples of this. A recent one is the Cambridge Analytica scandal with Facebook. Facebook is accused of allowing Cambridge Analytica to exploit the personal data of millions of Facebook users. And arguably, this actually influenced the outcome of a US election. So what happened here is Facebook violated users' trust. But a really important question is, how did we get Facebook into that position in the first place? How did it get into a place where it was this big and important, it even had access to all of this data, and it was in a position to use it in this way? Now, another major place where we have too big to fail institutions is in the financial system. So this is a pretty iconic picture of the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. A few large banks direct the flow of capital in our global economy, and we saw the downsides of that in 2008. These incidents are all leading to a crisis of faith and questions about how we engage with institutions and how much we can trust them. And it very naturally leads to the question of, do we still need institutions? Well, in 2008, we saw an answer to this question in the affirmative. A pseudonym called Satoshi Nakamoto released a paper on an email listserv. And there was a very, very important sentence of the paper right at the beginning, right in the beginning of the abstract. Bitcoin was designed to be a purely peer-to-peer version of electronic cash that would allow online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through a financial institution. Now, you might not know this. I didn't really until I was studying this for a while, but this was actually the first time that this had ever been achieved, that we were able to make online digital payments without a financial institution of any kind in the middle. So it wasn't just a paper. At the beginning of 2009, Satoshi released working software and people started running it. This software runs on computers around the world, and it creates something called the Bitcoin blockchain. So this is a block in mostly computer readable form. A block is a set of transactions, sort of who's paying whom in Bitcoin, and it's encoded for computers to read. Bitcoin is the world's first cryptocurrency. And what that means, it's a combination of two words, cryptography and currency. And cryptography is a field of mathematics that's the study of how to keep information secret, but also how to verify its integrity. Now, crypto systems were being built way before cryptocurrencies. If you're running a browser, you're running a pretty advanced crypto system. Cryptography was actually, it was controlled like a weapon for many years. You weren't allowed to export the software of cryptography to other countries. It was considered a weapon. Now, if you're looking at this closely, you might notice that there actually is a little bit of human readable text here. Chancellor on the brink of second bailout for banks. This was a headline taken directly from the London Times on January 4th, 2009. So, you know, Satoshi included this headline for multiple reasons. So one reason was to prove that Satoshi didn't start the blockchain earlier and was only releasing part of it now, but was going to release the rest of it later. Part of it was to prove that this block must have been made on January 4th or later, because how else would Satoshi know the headline in the London Times? But another reason was that this headline spoke directly to growing concerns about the consolidation of power into a few institutions that are too big to fail. More recently, there was a milestone in Bitcoin just earlier this month, and they included another headline in one of the blocks, one of the more recent blocks, which speaks to the Federal Reserve and their stimulus into the monetary policy, the trillions of dollars that are being released into the economy. So it's kind of interesting to timestamp these headlines as we move forward with very interesting monetary policy. Now, when Bitcoin launched, it was just a toy until one day in 2010, May 22nd, when a person went on the website Reddit and offered to pay 10,000 Bitcoin for 2 pizzas. So this day was very special. This was the day that this weird, funny internet money actually became worth something. The first time that it was actually used to make a transaction. And Bitcoin Pizza Day was just 4 days ago, May 22nd. It's still celebrated to this day. You might see a lot of people posting about Bitcoin and pizza on Twitter. This is why. Now, so the gentleman who did this, his name is Laszlo, and that's a photograph of Laszlo and I at the 60 Minutes office, where we were both lucky enough to be interviewed. So in 2010, Laszlo paid 10,000 Bitcoin for 2 pizzas. That was around $41 if you look at the exchange rate at that time. And so now we're going to have our first poll. So if you could put the poll up, I want to ask you the question, how much would the Bitcoin that Laszlo spent on that pizza, how much would it be worth today? And no cheating. Don't go to Google and just Google the price of a Bitcoin. Think, off the top of your head. Okay, 10,000 Bitcoin, $41. How much is that worth in 2020? And I guess we're getting the answers here. So as soon as we've accumulated a fair number, we can talk about this. I'm going to tell you right now that this is going to be a little scary. So the answer is very interesting. So the majority, some of you got the correct answer. Most of you got the correct answer, which is, get ready for it, $90 million. That is how much those 10,000 Bitcoin are worth today. So that's some expensive pizza. But only 34% of you, only about a third got that. Some said $1 million, some said 40,000, some said $41. But no, it is actually $90 million. However, you might notice that that Laszlo is still kind of smiling in this picture. He doesn't look like a person might look if they could have had $90 million and instead spent it on 2 Papa John's pizzas. And the reason for that is Laszlo actually understands the role he played in the beginning of Bitcoin's history and in its journey. However, things like this really make you question everything. What is money if this fake internet stuff could be worth $40 one day and $90 million 10 years later? Well, I think in order to understand that, you really have to think about what money is. There's nothing, we've used a lot of different symbols for money over time, but what you have to realize is there's nothing inherently valuable about a stone or a coin or a dollar bill. There's no reason that one of these things needs to have value, except for the fact that we've decided that these are symbols of value. And so therefore, people will accept them for things. I can use some of these things to go buy a sandwich. Money is really about the relationships and exchanges that we have with each other. It isn't something objective. It's a collective story about value that we tell each other. That's a very, very powerful concept. And what we're realizing now is that if stones and paper can be worth something because we assign it value, why can't bits on the internet also be worth something because we choose to assign them value? And they are worth something. So what we're seeing now is what I think is a new layer on the existing stack of internet protocols. What we had in the past was we had the way of transferring information around the world in a standardized way, but we didn't have that for value. And that's what cryptocurrencies are starting to show us. They're starting to show us a way forward for packetizing, discretizing, and standardizing the transfer of value. So going back to that chart that we had about unowned versus owned, we now see that there's another dimension to think about owned versus unowned systems, data and value. And so the way that we think about the internet versus telecom companies is maybe a good parallel and a good way of thinking about cryptocurrencies versus banks. It's this new dimension. And this is all based on technology that's called the blockchain. So what does that really mean? Okay, this is the slide that's actually going to explain blockchain technology to you. So what it starts with is software running on many thousands of computers around the world. This software is relaying around transactions and agreeing on them and eventually recording them in an append-only ledger. So what's happening here is everybody's coming up with transactions. They're spending their Bitcoin. They're gossiping these transactions around, and every single node has this logical version of an append-only ledger of these transactions. So each sort of block here is a set of payments. And what's very important is you can only add to this ledger. You can't remove. Another thing each node does is they look at this ledger and they build an auditable, verifiable database on top of it. So they use this append-only log to construct this database. And because they all have the same copy of the ledger, they all produce the same copy of the database. Now, in cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum, this copy is a set of who owns what money. In a more complex blockchain system, it might be the state of several smart contracts, or it might be the state of supply chain metrics. There's sort of anything you can store in a database, you could store in a blockchain. And you get these really nice properties out of it that is auditable and verifiable. So that's really what the power of this technology is here. I'm going to pause right there. And I wanted to give you a chance to open it up to questions.
Hi, Neha, how are you? Thank you for discussing blockchain and the Bitcoin. You mentioned that Bitcoin has certainly inherent values. I guess when we talk about value, sometimes we always think about cost. So I guess Bitcoins are mined. Can you talk about the cost of a Bitcoin?
Absolutely. So one thing you might notice here is that I didn't tell you how people get selected to become a part of this network. And in fact, there isn't really any selection. Anyone can join this network. You can go install some software on your computer and you can join this network. Now, in one way, that's very powerful. It's a very open system. In another way, it's very scary. It means that attackers could join the system, and I could run 1 million different nodes, and I could join the system and do something that's called a Sybil attack. So this was a serious problem in computer systems, and Satoshi came up with a very clever solution, which was, I'm going to require everyone who participates in the system, who wants to produce blocks, to demonstrate that they have done some computational activity. They've solved a cryptographic puzzle. This action of performing this computational activity is what's known as mining. And the reason it's called mining is because you get a reward for doing this computational activity. If you solve the puzzle and you get your block added to the ledger, then you get a reward in terms of Bitcoin. Now, what's ended up happening is that people have invented faster and faster machinery in order to compute this puzzle faster and faster and faster. So I'm running this presentation on my laptop right now. My laptop probably wouldn't find a block for millions of years. However, I could buy some hardware on the internet off Amazon that costs a few $1,000s that would be much, much more likely to find a Bitcoin block because it's been optimized. And so running this hardware is pretty expensive, actually. There are entire data centers located in areas around the world that have cheap energy contracts in order to do this efficiently. And so what we've seen is that depending on what the value of Bitcoin is, people will invest those resources into mining and producing blocks so that they can get rewarded in Bitcoin. And this is what's called an equilibrium, that the price of mining Bitcoin will end up equaling the reward that you can achieve from mining Bitcoin. And so mining Bitcoin has a pretty serious cost, which is about equal. And what's very cool about it is we can literally just look at the block reward, and we can look at the hash rate and how much, and we can see, okay, how much does it cost to mine a block? Well, 6.25 Bitcoin, because that's the mining reward right now. So around $62,000, I think. So that's very expensive. But and there are different sort of schools of thought on what gives Bitcoin its value. Some people think that it is this mining that gives Bitcoin its value. However, I'm of the opinion that it's our belief in the system that gives Bitcoin its value. And some of the properties it has leads to that belief. There will only ever be 21 million coins. It's hard to produce. It's decentralized. And I think those things lead to its value, which thus lead to the amount of energy that people are willing to expend mining it.
Thank you, Neha. And I understand your MIT Digital Currency Initiative work with central banks and sometimes governments to help them understand the importance of the work you do. And can you perhaps share with us some perspectives you hear from central banks and government? What's their take on the future of digital currency?
Absolutely. So that actually leads into my next slide. So I'm going to go ahead and continue, because I think it'll be helpful for people to see the next slide. So the next few slides. So what we see here is a whole architecture that might emerge for the internet of value. So yes, there is the internet, and we have transactions and payments on top of that, protocols for that. However, there's more. We can do smart contracts that actually move money and payments conditionally. We can build things like securities and derivatives on the smart contract platform. And we've seen also the advent of decentralized exchange. So instead of having an entity like the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange at the middle facilitating trades, we can actually do that in a peer-to-peer decentralized way. Someone who wants to buy and someone who wants to sell can find each other and execute the trade without going through a centralized intermediary. So we've seen that Bitcoin and Ethereum are examples of some of these layers. Bitcoin's actually at the transaction layer. It has some scripting capabilities, but Ethereum really marries the smart contracts. And we're still kind of figuring out how these things will play out. But what I think it's important to note is there might be an alternative at the transactions and payments layer, and that's central bank digital currency. So let me speak a little bit about central bank digital currency and what that is. So if we look at protocols for transferring value digitally, we actually have sort of two big categories that have existed so far. On the left, there's the existing system. We already have digital money in some forms. However, it's a liability on a financial institution. Cash is a liability on the central bank. And it's really important to make that distinction, because in order to move money digitally before cryptocurrencies, like I said, you had to go through a financial institution. And I would argue that these systems, unfortunately, were not as open and did a lot of gatekeeping. So we have things like banks, SWIFT, ACH, and we've seen some pretty innovative mobile money solutions develop in different places. For example, M-Pesa in Kenya with Safaricom, Alipay and WeChat Pay in China, and Google Pay, Apple Pay, et cetera, here in the US. So these systems are closed. They're medium risk. There is a risk that the financial institution, we operate on a fractional reserve banking system, could go under and lose your money, but I would say, they're pretty safe. And then we have the cryptocurrency ecosystem. Bitcoin, Ethereum, Tezos, Ripple, Zcash, Monero, these are all decentralized systems. On top of that, people have actually built so-called stable coins, which mimic digital fiat, which mimic fiat currency. USDC is a version of the digital dollar, as is Tether. And these are usually done by bringing institutions back into the mix. An institution will hold the money, usually the dollars, and issue a token one for them, usually in a bank account somewhere. We've also seen algorithmic stablecoins that don't require a bank and try to maintain a peg algorithmically. But I think what's really powerful is that eventually we could have central bank digital currency. So what is this? This is all digital liability on the central bank. China has already developed a central bank digital currency called DCEP, that stands for Digital Currency Electronic Payment. Sweden is also has made it clear that they are looking into developing their own central bank digital currency. And there's even been many calls in the US to think about issuing a digital dollar. Now, in some ways, this is the ideal, a programmable interface. You don't have the systemic risk of involving a financial institution, and it could be built in a very open programmatic way. To me, it very much mirrors what happened with ARPANET, which was a government research partnership. So I'm quite excited about the field of central bank digital currency, but I think what's important to note here is that we could have sort of that internet of value that I talked about, and it could be built on any one of these three things. Now, the left side, the existing systems have been around for a while and have not facilitated the interface in order to build these things. Cryptocurrency has facilitated that interface, but it's not really hitting mainstream. So I think central bank digital currency could be, if built correctly, could be a real sweet spot here. Now, let's talk a little bit about what kinds of things are enabled by this. So this is a picture of the very first stock share, the world's oldest stock share, and it was actually a part of the. It was a share for the Dutch East India Company. So the Dutch East India Company was the first sort of global company to do a public offering to get investment from the people, and this was in order to fund. They made these huge long journeys and voyages around the world to facilitate trade, bringing cinnamon, coffee, pepper, nutmeg, jewels from across Asia into Europe. And in order to really do this, in order to get to the scale they needed, in order to do this successfully, they needed investment from the public. And so they did this stock share, this stock offering. Now, this was 1602. Since then, stock offerings have clearly evolved a lot, and they've evolved into something kind of like this. The way that we do public equity offerings now is you have to go through all of these steps. You have to hire a lawyer, an investment bank, recruit a board, incorporate, write a prospectus, get audited, do all of these different things, go on a roadshow. It's a quite a lengthy, expensive process to do a public offering. And there are some reasons for this. Part of it is about safety. Part of it is about investor disclosure. But what I argue is that we have seen actually a very different way of doing these types of offerings. So this is what I call the new way of doing a public offering. And what I'm showing you here is I'm showing you a view onto a smart contract on a blockchain called Ethereum. This is a smart contract that implements an interface called ERC20. And what it's doing is I have decided to create my own token. I'm calling it Neha shares, and I've decided to issue 1 billion of them. And the ticker is NN. And once I release this onto the Ethereum network, anyone can buy these Neha shares. I might have sort of a company or a protocol or something off, to the side that where I use this as the balance, the index of who owns what of my company. Now, the Ethereum blockchain is permissionless. Anyone with Ethereum could conceivably buy my Neha shares. And in fact, what we saw over the last 2 years is many billions of dollars being raised in this way from people all across the world. What we're seeing in 2020 is a little bit of a pushback on this way of raising money because some of them are actually illegal securities offerings. But having this programmatic interface, having this standard is incredibly powerful. And it's not just tokens and securities. There are actually many different types of what we call decentralized applications. As I alluded to earlier, there are these things called algorithmic stablecoins, which is a program that tries to maintain a peg automatically. People have built things like prediction markets, where you can go and bet on who might win a sporting event or who the winner of an election will be, harnessing the power of the crowd. One kind of dystopian outcome of prediction markets is the worry that they might lead to what's called assassination markets, where people can post money as a reward for assassinating someone. So there are a lot of really dystopian directions that this could go in, which is very interesting, and I think it's going to be a huge point of debate going forward. people have also built lending smart contracts and derivatives. And one of my favorites are what are called non-fungible tokens. These are digital collector's items. The most popular of these, most well known, was a game called CryptoKitties. The way that CryptoKitties works was that you could buy these cats and then you could breed them together to produce new cats. So fun fact, that kitty in the bottom right-hand corner is actually me. They made personalized CryptoKitty versions for some of the people in the blockchain space, so that's kind of fun. And there's a very popular game now called Gods Unchained, which is about trading cards digitally. So there's a lot of experimentation going on with dApps. And I think this is a great point in time to put up the second poll. So the second poll is going to ask you about your involvement with cryptocurrency. So I'm giving you 3 options. So have you ever bought a cryptocurrency, interacted with a decentralized application? If you haven't, do you know someone who has, a peer, a friend, a family member? Or are you in the category where you've never done it and you don't even know anyone who has done it? So I think this will be pretty illuminating for our audience. And I always like to see how much people are involved in cryptocurrency, how much time they're actually spending with it, and how they found that interaction. Because I think one of the biggest problems we have to work on in the cryptocurrency space is the usability. So let's see those poll results. Okay, so 19% of you have bought a cryptocurrency or interacted with a decentralized application. So that's almost 20%. That's not insignificant. 50% of you know someone who has, and 30% of you have not and don't know anyone who has. So 70% of you, I would say, have been in a situation where you've either done it yourself or someone you know has done it. So that's very interesting. That's higher penetration than I thought, honestly. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, okay, CryptoKitties, card games, what is this all about? Is this really going to happen? Do we really need an internet of value? And to answer that question, I want to turn back to 1995. And so what I have here is an article written by a guy, Clifford Stoll, in 1995 for Newsweek. And Clifford, in this article, made a lot of predictions about the internet. He was, I think, pretty fed up with all the hype around the internet. And so this was his article sort of pushing back on that. And so here are 3 things he said in this article. No online database will replace your daily newspaper. No CD-ROM can take the place of a competent teacher. And no computer network will change the way that governments work. Clifford was 0 for 3 on these, I would argue. The internet certainly has a lot of problems. We're drowning in email, we're being manipulated by ads and clickbait, but the internet has also caused a tremendous amount of innovation. We can collaborate in different time zones. I can give you this presentation over Zoom. We can access the courses of the world's top universities for free. The web was overhyped, but the web was also underhyped. And I think it's very important to note that some technology can be overhyped and underhyped at the same time. And just because it's overhyped doesn't mean that it's not going to make a very long-term transformation. So I think part of the problem was that back in 1995, we couldn't really see forward to what was possible. So, let's take the first one. No online database will replace your daily newspaper. I think the way Clifford might have been thinking about newspapers online was literally just taking a paper newspaper and scanning it and then putting it on the internet. So looking at PDFs on a website of the New York Times. But that's not actually what's happened. Our news online is so much richer than that. We have really beautiful customized data visualizations that are tailored to each of us. We're looking at social networks that are creating stories in the blink of an eye. We're seeing citizen journalism where someone on the ground sees Marines invading a compound and capturing Osama bin Laden and is the first to report that. So, it wasn't a one-to-one mapping. You can't map the analog world one-to-one into the digital world. And I think we're going to see that happen as well with the internet of value and with cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology. So one way that I find really helpful of looking at this is to think about there's this protocol on the internet called BitTorrent. Now, many of you might not know what BitTorrent was, even though in the early 2000s, it was the majority of traffic on the internet. And it was a way of downloading files in a peer-to-peer manner. And it was often used for illegal movie download or content sharing. So BitTorrent doesn't really, it exists, but it's not really in high use right now. Definitely not 70% of internet traffic the way it was in 2006. And that's because we have things like Netflix and HBO Now and Spotify. I argue that we wouldn't have these things if it weren't for BitTorrent. BitTorrent showed the incumbent industry, it showed the media that users wanted to stream content over the internet, and they were going to do it by hook or by crook, even if they had to do it in this peer-to-peer manner with this software. And I really think, you know, BitTorrent showed these folks that they needed to offer a better service to users. And I can imagine something similar happening in the cryptocurrency world. So we have Bitcoin right now. Maybe in another 10 years, Bitcoin will certainly still exist. It's like a cockroach. It's designed to withstand a nuclear war. Bitcoin will certainly exist, but maybe we'll see that it has spawned entirely new industries. Maybe the investment banks will settle stock sales using security transfers, using instant settlement on the blockchain. Maybe central banks will have issued digital currency. Maybe NASDAQ will be trading tokenized assets that are backed by a blockchain. This is already starting to happen. We're already, you know, I used to show this slide a couple of years ago as sort of a view of what the future would look like. Now I think I'm actually describing what's happening right now is that we're seeing this inspire a new type of financial infrastructure. Now, I want to spend a moment at the end of this talk just to talk a little bit about central bank digital currency in 2020. Where are we right now? So obviously, we are in the midst of a pandemic, and that pandemic is having really interesting effects on the field of digital currency. So one thing is that people are avoiding physical cash. And it's actually happening in two different ways. So there has been a bit of a movement to cash. So we have seen people withdraw cash and presumably put it under their mattress because cash is a flight to safety. And there's a belief that if things get worse, cash will be very important. However, transactions are becoming more and more electronic. Most of the places that I shop or where I buy food used to take cash and are now saying we would really prefer contactless credit cards. I don't want to touch your cash. I don't want to touch the coins. So that's been something very interesting. Of course, as I said, China is piloting their version of a central bank digital currency in 4 cities. Just to be clear, this is not built on a blockchain, but this is a liability on the People's Bank of China, on the Central Bank of China. They are working with the banks in doing this. So it's not something that you can hold outside of, it's unclear how much you can hold it outside of the bank, I will say. You might be able to hold small amounts, but not large amounts. But there's also been some really interesting stuff with the government response to COVID-19 and its effect on the economy, in particular with the stimulus. So first of all, I urge you to check out #MintTheCoin on Twitter. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib put forward a plan to mint $2 trillion coins. And the US Treasury, through a loophole, could mint trillion-dollar coins because they have the right to mint currency, and then could deposit these coins at the Federal Reserve to instantly create $2 trillion that could be used for stimulus. I do not think that this has legs right now, but it's very interesting to see politicians actually put forth this type of policy, which used to be sort of crazy and far out in left field. What we have seen are the CARES Act, and 2 initial versions of the CARES Act actually mention the idea of Fed accounts. So as you probably know, there are stimulus checks going out to the population, $1,200, and some of you might have received that. If the IRS has your bank information, they can do a direct deposit directly into your bank account. Unfortunately, there is a very high percentage of Americans that do not have bank accounts, or for which the IRS does not have that information on file. And these folks are out of luck. They have to wait for a check to get mailed to them. It takes many, many weeks, if not months longer than the direct deposit route. And these are some of the folks who need these checks the most, who need the stimulus the most. So two initial versions of the CARES Act actually talked about giving every U.S. Citizen an account at the Federal Reserve. Now, these were taken out before the CARES Act actually passed, but it's interesting to see Congress thinking about this and moving in this direction. So sort of to sum up, if we're looking at this graph, and, I really think it's about the purple between the red and the blue. If we're talking about open versus closed, I think there is a middle ground where I would put things like central bank digital currency, and we need to really take a strong look at it. And what we'll end up with is a whole new financial stack. So definitely we'll have the crypto assets and the crypto platforms, but we'll also have central bank digital currency alongside bank accounts. Banks aren't going away anytime soon. They still fulfill an important purpose with lending, but we'll be able to see more competition, more experimentation. We'll see people issuing digital tokens instead of doing traditional IPOs. And we'll see regular exchanges competing with decentralized exchanges. So I'm quite excited about the future moving forward. And it all sort of comes down to the future that we are trying to create. And our goal at the Digital Currency Initiative is to create a future in which moving value across the world is as fast and easy as moving information. So thank you very much for your time. Those are all the slides I have today. But I believe we have some time for questions. So I'm very excited about questions and about taking that.
Hi, Neha. I think we've got a few questions on blockchain privacy and security. So I think with the 5G now being the enabler, it's going to make many things happen quicker in the industry. Now, with that, I think one question is on the technology side of the blockchain. Can blockchain or ledger be compromised? I think the second question is more on the legal side. Are there privacy laws or cyber laws that can protect us?
Great question. I love that question because the question, can blockchain technology be compromised? There is no such thing as a 100% secure crypto system. Everything, unfortunately, is susceptible to bugs that people might write in the software. Cryptographic primitives like hash functions and signatures, when they're first created, they can be pretty hard to break, but give it 5 or 10, 15, 20 years, and usually someone has found a break. For example, there's a hash function called SHA-1, and the idea is to create a fingerprint of a piece of data. That's what a hash function does. But you shouldn't be able to take a fingerprint and go backwards. Google was able to, with a lot of computing power, create collisions in SHA-1. So two different PDFs that hash to the same fingerprint, which you're not supposed to be able to do. So unfortunately, no system is foolproof. And it's very important to think about your threat model. Think about what kinds of attacks you're actually trying to prevent. The blockchain is good for a threat model where you don't have a trusted third party who can run your database. So if you have a trusted third party that can run your database and you are confident that they will continue to operate, that they will do what they're supposed to do, that they will abide by their contract, you can even audit it. You don't need a blockchain. A blockchain is really for the case where there's no entity that can run the database for you. And so you need to run it jointly amongst all of the participants. But if those participants collude, all bets are off. So a blockchain is not a magical security box that prevents corruption. It can help in certain instances.
Yeah, and on the legal side, I guess we are waiting to see how things.
Yeah. So I think that I think GDPR is a great example of how we can have regulation that helps move technology in a direction which protects users and protects users' rights. I think we're at a really critical point right now where lawmakers are starting to wake up and realize that they are going to have to encode some public policy goals around user data and privacy, how that data can be used, what rights a user has over their data, can they remove it, can they take it down? And so it's, Europe has obviously been quite ahead of the United States. I think we're going to start seeing more of that in the US. My only hope for that is that the laws aren't too prescriptive. And I think the only way to get good legislation in that way is for technologists to work with the lawmakers.
And another question is on the value of the Bitcoin. We understand Bitcoin is being traded on multiple exchanges. So first is how is the Bitcoin value being derived? Second is, can Bitcoin be converted into fiat, different country currencies such as USD or Euro?
Yeah, great questions. And so this goes back to the ecosystem of cryptocurrency exchanges. So there are several companies that operate around the world. The biggest one in the US, I believe, is Coinbase, and a very big one. Another big one, the biggest one globally, I believe, is Binance. And these are cryptocurrency exchanges. And so what that means is that you can go to Coinbase, for example, you can connect your bank account and you can use your dollars to buy Bitcoin. Now, how is that price set? Great question. And it's set the way that any market clearing price is set. There are people who want to buy Bitcoin. There are people who want to sell Bitcoin. And they post orders saying at what price they're willing to do that. And the market price is where those orders intersect. So if someone's willing to buy for $9,000 and someone's willing to sell for $9,001, well, that doesn't intersect. Someone's willing to sell for $8,999, then that's where the prices will intersect. And you choose a point between those two numbers. So these exchanges are the places where all of this activity happens. And where the prices are set. As you can see, it's a very decentralized type of thing. There isn't anyone setting the price of Bitcoin, from on high. It's entirely determined by how much people are willing to sell it for and buy it for. And the question about converting Bitcoin to fiat, yes, you can go to one of these exchanges and list your Bitcoin to sell it. You can deposit it and sell it, and the exchange will match you with someone who wants to buy it. Now, there are some people out there who are moving really large quantities of Bitcoin or buying large quantities of Bitcoin, and there are specialized trading desks that can do this effectively.
Very good. Thank you. And I think we have one question that's a different thinking about Bitcoin is Bitcoin as another layer, value layer on the top of, we're using credit cards, e-money right now for transaction. So the question is, can Bitcoin be used as another layer above e-money? So can they be used to transfer value electronically, but based on our current infrastructure of payment that we already have? I don't know if that's one consideration, or is that a possibility?
Yeah, very interesting question. So I think this question really gets at something that is quite profound, which is Bitcoin, in the end of its evolution, is it an asset? Is it just a digital asset? Or is it a rail? Is it actually something that we can run a lot of things on top of? And honestly, I think that this is still being worked out. So, when you look at platforms like Ethereum, which have a more complex smart contract language, Ethereum is both an asset and a rail. It is a digital asset. You can go and buy an Ether on a cryptocurrency exchange, but it is also a platform for running different types of software that creates other assets. And the same thing can be done with Bitcoin. It's a bit more difficult. It's a bit more clunky, but you can do the same thing with Bitcoin. And, I think this is still open for debate. How are these things going to connect together? Is Bitcoin's greatest impact going to be its value as an asset that is sort of a version of digital gold that is outside of any specific country's monetary control in terms of monetary policy? Or is its contribution going to be the technology, the rails? And I think this is still being worked out.
Okay. I think we have a question maybe from an MIT student in the audience. Are there public blockchains that students can experiment with? Can they work on a class project? Are there something they can work on while they're in a course?
Yeah, that's a great question too. Yes, there are lots of things out there to experiment with. So the person specified, I think that this is for a business course. There's a lot of really great material out there, and in particular in the web for sort of interacting with simulations of blockchains. So that's really good. There's also a lot of really great books. So I think if you sort of do some Googling, you'll find that there's some really great stuff out there. I don't have something specific to recommend off the top of my head right now, unfortunately. One option would be watching some of our OpenCourseWare courses that the DCI has put out. So if you go to our website and go to courses, you'll find a good list there.
Thank you. There's a question about blockchain as an authentication media. Can blockchain be used instead of other authentication such as biometrics? How do you compare blockchain with other authentication methods?
Great question. So something that's important to remember when you think about blockchains and you think about using blockchains is the phrase garbage in, garbage out. So blockchains only secure the data that you put into them. So they operate at the level of digital identifiers. So a blockchain doesn't know that I'm Neha Narula, that I attended MIT, that I work there now. Some other system has to affirm that and convert that knowledge into a digital identifier. And if that process is broken, then the blockchain is confirming data that doesn't make sense. So I think what will end up happening is as we experiment with authentication methods, biometrics and other sort of real life wetware, hardware ways of confirming identity will be an important piece of the pipeline to getting solid, authentic data onto the blockchain. So, it kind of comes first is the way that I would describe it. I wouldn't describe them as alternatives. I would say that they need to be used together.
I think another question is about government, how government will perceive the prevalent use of digital currency if that turned out to be the case. One mention is government relies on tax revenues and tracking the movement of funds and collecting necessary taxes. So if digital currency were to be more prevalent, how would that impact the central banks? Perhaps you can talk about pro and cons. I think there's reason for both, perhaps.
Yeah, this is also a great question. So I think there's a bunch of different things going on at the government level. First of all, different countries have very different viewpoints in this. And some places, in fact, are trying to be a safe harbor for cryptocurrencies in order to attract fintech companies and fintech businesses. So we've seen that on some islands in the Caribbean with the Seychelles, with I forgot the name of the country that begins with M in Europe. So we've seen some countries try to develop very crypto favorable regulation in order to promote their standing as a destination for companies. I think that, and then, once you get past different countries, you also get at different organizations in the government of one country. There are all these different agencies that work in different ways. So in the US, I think folks in the FBI and the Department of Justice are focused on criminal activity with cryptocurrency. So are folks using Bitcoin or other cryptocurrency in order to fund terrorism or buy drugs? And they focus on things like shutting down dark markets and things like that. I believe that one of those folks told me one time that Bitcoin is great for them and horrible for criminals because it's not very anonymous, actually. You have a history of all transactions. And so those agencies, those law enforcement agencies have developed the tools in order to track down those payments and are using that very effectively. So that's working out for them. I definitely think, we wouldn't be having this conversation around digital currency and central bank digital currency if it weren't for cryptocurrencies and if it weren't for the concern that private money might surpass public money. The use of private money might surpass public money. And this is a big concern. And I think the thing is cryptocurrencies so far have not obtained wide penetration. They're not very popular. And it's more concerning when we see, a company like Facebook start to develop a cryptocurrency, even as part of an association, because they have 2 billion users. And you might see extra, it might really affect small countries, definitely ability to enact monetary policy if you have a currency that is in wide use, which might be the case because Facebook is incredibly powerful and popular. So there's a lot of different sort of angles to this question, things to think about.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Narula. I think this is very helpful, and we certainly learned a great deal today. And I'd like to thank all the audience, and thank you for joining us for another great webinar series. And if you have any questions, feel free to email ILP. You may find more information about ILP at ilp.mit.edu. We're happy to follow up if you have any questions. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks for having me.